Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Keshe American Knowledge Team meeting. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon, and I want to welcome every continent is being represented at this meeting, and that's what makes this meeting so powerful. We're in the back seat following the powerful meetings and the Knowledge Seekers workshops on Thursday, followed up with the awesome Brazilian classes on Friday, and we're sort of trying to clean up the crumbs maybe, but we're discussing some very important things. We're talking about the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. We're in the advanced transition discussion. The subject today is microbes. My name is Alexander. I'm from Canada. It is July the 28th, 2024, and this is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. And so we have continued this for going on 4 years now. And as I said, this is a continuation of the advanced series. Please understand that this is all basic, very basic, because this is public teachings. However, everyone has an understanding of how this world is working. And the qualification for this is that, yes, you were born. So as we're discussing this advanced transition, it involves a z-axis dimension because it completes 3 dimensions. And we got involved with parasites to understand how some are contributing and some are leaching, and what is the purpose of that. But more importantly, I've separated the parasites discussion from microbes. And today we're going to discuss microbes, because this is not our world that we understand with. This is something that we need a microscope, and that's why they call them microbes, because in terms of mathematics, this is 10 to the -6th power, which means it's 6 orders of magnitude smaller than our existence. And so our existence is trying to carry on this plasma highway, but we're so far away from it. We're still on this hesitancy highway because it's the lowest energy state, and it is somewhat comfortable, but not always. Life can be very hard, and this is one of the reasons that we have to get up on that horse because the horse walks faster than we do. But there are energies, and so we see fire, and where there's fire, well, you need to have water, and where there's water, there's a beach. And of course, the favorite thing on our beach is things that have curves, like beach balls. But where you have a ball, this is a planet of very dirty microbes. And so it really causes us to frown our face and act in revulsion, repulsion, and disgust. But, as we're searching for our outer space, the question came up is, do dirty microbes exist on the plasma highway to our pie in the sky? I mean, let's face it, who wants to eat a pie that's, covered with dirty microbes? And the answer is surprising. So what we're discussing is the plasma science as put forward by Maranteva Kolikesh, and it's outlined in book number 1, which is the Universal Order of Creation of Matters. And it's taken a while to figure out what these matters are and where these matters are. And so the book number 2 helps us because of the structure of the light, which in itself is kind of confusing because how can life have structure? It's not something that you can kind of climb upon like a ladder or sit on. And then there's book number 3, The Origin of the Universe. And how come this is number 3 and not number 1? And then we see that from 1 we create 2. And so that offers us a clue. And this one that we're talking about is our one planet. And for 336 weeks in a row, Rick Crammond and the Universal Council members are trying to explain to humanity that when we travel to another place, no one knows if you're from Kentucky or Paris or wherever. And if you say that, they will really look at you strange because they don't know where you are. You are from the Earth, and that Earth is one planet, and all of us are members of this planet. So that makes us one nation. And although we have a variety in that, which is kind of interesting. It's as interesting as it is going to an ice cream shop and having dozens of different flavors. You could say that each flavor is a race, but it's all ice cream. It's all one shop. But in our shop, justice and world peace are paramount. And the reason for it is because if we want to get on that plasma highway, these are the ethics that we have to follow. This becomes paramount. So we are not there. We are on the transmission highway. And to elevate ourselves to this plasma highway, we have to go through the transition highway, which means at that point, we have choices to make. And this is a good thing because many of us are despondent because we don't have any choices. You see, the situation has come to the point where in our discussions, we are trying to make commentary and say, oh, socially we have some issues. Politically we have issues. Financially we have issues, and so it makes interesting conversation. But that conversation manifests itself as a form of entertainment. We're not in the entertainment business. We're in the plasma business. And to understand our MAGRAPH pie chart, we have to understand that the speed of light is a constant transmission. But then the question comes in, how come we have a variable transition of the light? Because we have different colors of light. And now we have people who say, well, the universe is 99% hydrogen. And we're wondering, what is the remainder? Is that garbage? Or is that you? Or are you garbage? And are you here or you should be somewhere else? And where are you exactly? So in order to pinpoint with accuracy, we had to go through various stages of understanding the terminology. So as it applies to carpentry, we have an X, Y, and Z axis. And as it applies to magnetic field forces, we have rotation, polarity, and field strength. But as it applies to the plasma science, we're talking about transmission, transition, and transmutation. But interestingly enough, that we haven't determined the dimensions. So in other words, we can have the X, Y, and Z axis on every dimension. And so we've gone through the transmission dimension, and now we're discussing the transition dimension, and we're in the advanced stage of doing that. And so what we realize that as we create these dimensions, that just becomes the medium. And sometimes a medium could be medium small or sometimes medium large. But whatever the medium, it's not the message. The message travels on the medium. And so messages come to us and they combine. And so the fundamental combination is when two forces coming together. So that brings us the x-axis dimension and the y-axis dimension. So we see that the creation of the universe, which exists from energy, is where all things are working in combination. And so that was the structure of the MAGRAPH. But since things are coming and going, then we have a connection, which is the structure of light. And in order to understand which way we're going, then we have to have a charge. So a lot of people think, well, that charge, is either positive or negative based on the energy. Well, the energy is always positive. So the charge is based on the motion. And then the motion is to and from. And then the question then comes is, which dimension is it coming to and going from? So when we look at the physical energy that we are so dependent on, and then we see the manifestation in our cell growth, we see the processing of sugar energy, and we have to identify what sugar is. Either it's natural or it's processed or it's cosmic. And fundamentally, we have what we see as a hexagonal gravitational form that is interacting with the pentagonal magnetical form, and that there's a polar flipping, and in that process, there's a twisting. And so all along, there's this susceptibility, and the net result is that we have this pattern of coiling, and it creates a growth, a spherical growth. And as we found, that spherical growth can be in multiple directions and compounded. And so the fundamental energy that's on this planet manifests itself as water. And it brings together hydrogen and oxygen. And so this energy that is in motion is an energy pack. But every pack needs to be in a package. And so water becomes an excellent energy parceling unit. And what has been confounding is that hydrogen has a mass of 1, oxygen has a mass of 8, and yet what is interesting is that the combination is around MAGRAPH. So the hydrogen being magnetical and the oxygen being gravitational, that there's a disparity in field strength here, and yet there is a balance. And so this balance that we're seeing here is not an equal balance. So when we say balance, it's not like a teeter-totter where you have one on one side and one on the other side, and then you kind of flip back and forth. In terms of the water, it's not very balanced. So what we have to understand is that this balance can manifest in the physical state, but the energy pack is balanced in the plasmatic state. So this unique characteristic of water allows us to shear off, let's say, one hydrogen, and so it's positive and it's looking for a home, and the hydroxyl that's left is now negatively charged because it's lost a positive. So that puts it in the minus position, and it too is also looking for a home. And it is in this process that we see energies crossing over or deflecting or twisting. And in the process of twisting, we see this tightening, coiling, and tunneling. And this becomes very important to discuss today because for years and years, we've had this electron fixation fallacy. And that is that, its electrons are part of the quantum electrodynamics, and that describes the interaction between light and matter. The problem, of course, is that light is matter. And then we have this theory of annihilating particles and antiparticles. And then, of course, we come to the conclusion that there's no creation nor annihilation. It's only a change of directions of moving particles. But that these directions somehow refer to the past or to the future and indicate the direction they're from. But today is today. And if we were to be mathematicians or accountants, we like to extrapolate the future based on the past. But this is a fallacy because the extrapolation from the past would only be there if we were clinging to the past and building from that. So plasmatically, yes, we can build that. But when we capture a field, that energy has to go through a transition. And so to manifest this transition, we have to bring the three dimensions together, the X, Y, and Z axis, and they have to go through this transition. And so in the physicality, we try and relate this to the ground. In terms of transition, we try and elevate ourselves above the ground into a non-tangible matter state. But when we're talking about the Z-axis transition, well, we kind of have to figure out what ground we're talking about and what is the difference in this position and how do we facilitate this. So if we look at the relationship between the physicality and the plasma reality, and we see that the X, Y, Z axis represents the plasmatic manifestation of the forces that determine our existence. So the X-axis is a dimension that is basically along the ground, but that ground rotates around the planet. And then, of course, the Y-axis is determined by polarity. So the planet rotates around that pole. And the Z-axis is actually determined by an interdependence. The interdependence between the relationship between X and Y axis. So all of these relationships are on different planes, but these planes have their own axis of dimension, but they interact. And this is the key. And we know this because we have a gravitational conformation of the hydrogen spectrum. And where we're at is trying to understand that this hydrogen spectrum has a signature, which is in the visible light spectrum, and is unique to hydrogen. So this allows us to verify the presence of the hydrogen, and as such, it becomes a gravitational manifestation. And as such, it implies that there is a magnetical contribution. And that magnetical contribution has to come from the interaction of the sun and the earth. And so the contribution of those two create a binding field. And from that binding field, there has to be some kind of impetus. And so the convergence of that binding field is completed by the energy coming from the universe. And so that would be the missing dimension, if you will. And so the convergence of all three of these magnetical forces manifest themselves as a gravitational force, which we see on this planet. But let's understand that this planet, too, is a plasmatic manifestation in the gravitational format. So when we're trying to look at how things are manifested, we measure things by the pH. And the pH is referred to as water because that is the most stable. But that water is a combination of hydrogen and oxygen, as we said. So when we talk about the pH and we refer to it as the potentiation of hydrogen, it's also the potentiation of oxygen. Because the binding force of the hydrogen is dependent on the oxygen. The binding force of the oxygen is dependent on the hydrogen. So the susceptibility is determined by the interaction of the two. Excuse me. So at a pH of 7, which is neutral, we see that it could be acidic and a pH of 7, and it could be alkaline and a pH of 7. And why this is significant is because if we add the acidity and the alkalinity together, we get 14. And this is important to understand because when we deviate from the neutral point, we also have to get 14. So if we think of the pH as like a zipper, and as we go through the different transition layers, and we find that, well, if that water is turned to a pH of 6, then there has to be a corresponding manifestation of a pH of 8. And so it goes. If it's 5, that's 9. And if it's 4, then it's 10. And in all cases, the water splitting always totals 14. And so what that means is that there's a changeable balance. The water still maintains its balanced position. And that balanced position always totals 14. But within that balanced position, there is a change. So in order just to understand the transmission on the x-axis dimension, we have to see that there's a motion. And so that motion is created through the change of the rotating fields as they're going through this pH zipper transmission. So there is a susceptibility that causes this motion. And it's more than just a motor. There's also a pH transition with peaks and valleys. And so we find that if we have the peaks at 4, we also have the peaks at 10, and that gives us 14. Or if we have the valley at 5 and the valley at 9, that also gives us 14. So the peaks and valleys basically have nothing to do with the transition. They have everything to do with the motion. Because as we go along the ground, we also go along the transition. So we can see that there are things that are affected on this planet by pH density. And so we find that the pH total of 14 is dependent on the acid-alkaline balance. And we find that the extreme, the acid is oily and the alkaline is wet, and so these two don't interact. And gravity seeks density. So as we change the density, we find that we can change whatever we're operating with. And so the oxygen is more dense than the hydrogen. And so that makes the oxygen alkaline and the hydrogen magnetic. But the combination seems to be around MAGRAV. So clearly, it has nothing to do with the physicality in that regard, because the physicality is a form artifact of the plasma reality. And we've seen that in the cups of life. And so we had to understand that the cups of life were not the cups of pandemic. But what we did was we incorporated elements and water and salt and nanocoated copper and zinc and other things. And so this became the process of monatomic science, which was still in the physical state, but clearly at an elevated state from the lowest energy state. And it became GANS. And GANS had an affinity with our emotional construct. And GANS in itself had a physical affinity as well. So in other words, the zinc oxide reflected on our emotions, and the copper oxide reflected on our physicality. But we had others. We had CO2 GANs and calcium GANs, and of course, we created the oil and we created the water, and the two didn't mix, did they? The oil sat on the surface. But what was interesting was that this oil, and as we say, oil and water don't mix. When we took the amino acid and we added it back to the cups of life, and I hope you were very observant, we found that the oil didn't sit on the surface of the cups of life. The oil dissolved within the cups of life. And so within the cups of life, clearly we had plasma water. And so the amino acids were in a plasmatic state. And we have to understand this because when we're talking about the z-axis transition dimension, the z-axis transition dimension, we see that we had this atomic physicality because we had elements in there. But then we had this monatomic state, still atomic physicality, but what we call it a nanostate at that point in time. And then we had this GANS, which was much, much bigger than the monatomic state, but it was still in the physical state. And so just to go through these three different physical states, each one was at least an order of magnitude. And the reason each one was only one order of magnitude is because it determines whether it's monatomic or it's atomic. However, we find that when we got into the monatomic state, there were different energy states. So not all nano states are of the same energy state. And the reason for this, of course, is the fact that the nanocoding is in layers. And so as we have more and more layers, we changed the nature of the monatomic state. So did that apply to the GANs? Well, yes, it did. So not all GANSs are the same. certainly not of the same combination. However, not of the same texture either. So some ganses were fluffy, and some ganses were bigger than other ganses, and some ganses would sink, and some ganses would float. And then there's other ganses that would just move around, and then other ganses would do other things in combination. So the nice thing about the ganses is that they were facilitating this principal matter interaction of these energy packs. And so we say, well, the fundamental interaction, of course, is the x-axis rotation, which is equatorial, and it's interacting with the polar axis, which obviously is rotating around the poles. And so we create this z-axis, which is a third dimension reflecting this principal interaction. And then we find that this is a two-way street of energy and motion, because there's transmission of energy and a transition of energy. So we have this one Magravs condition, we call it the sun, and we have a Magravs condition, we call it the earth, and there's an interaction there. But if we look at the principal energy flow with respect to our planet, we find that it too has the same characteristics of a two-way transmission and a two-way transition of energy. And as we've discovered with the solvent of life, we call it water, and that's the most important constituent on this planet, which is what makes us the blue planet. But we find that the water is liquid. And so what we have to understand about the liquid water is that there is moisture that is in the air, and there is moisture that can be solid. So we find the water is kind of being this transition zone. And this is very important because this is what makes it a universal solvent. And this is what facilitates life on this planet. So in order to understand the science, and for me, it was very fortunate because I had a terrible understanding of science. And I attribute this to a terrible teaching method. And so I had to look for a foundation, a rock solid foundation that would give me the understanding of how energy flows. And so that involved the negative charge principle, where the negative gives and the positive takes. And so if it's taking or giving from itself, that's a binding energy. But if it's exchanging energy with another Magravs condition, then that creates a flowing energy. So decisions have to be made on whether it's flowing or whether it's binding, and these are choices to make. But what differentiates the giving and the taking has to do with surface to volume ratios. And so the higher the surface to volume ratio, the higher the negative charge. The higher the negative charge, the more giving it is. And so when we look at the basic math, as we've been taught that 1 to 1 is 2, we find that there's a problem with this because it assumes that the first one and the second one are the same. And it also assumes that the first one and the second one are consumed in the process of creating the two. Isn't it? That's what we see. You know, we manufacture a product, and that product is the bringing together of labor and materials. And so we get this product. And so the labor is gone and the materials are gone, and the labor is replaced with the memory of that labor, maybe. And of course, the materials are now garbage. And so we need to throw that garbage away. And so we need another dimension. And since we're watching this, we are that other dimension. And so when we throw things away, are we throwing that in our dimension? Or is there a fifth dimension where we can throw the stuff away? Or are we the garbage? And this becomes a very important question because there are some people who think that we are. Because, we have 73 trillion cells and, so we can afford to get rid of some. And so what are these cells? They're basic structural and functional units of all forms of life. So when we say basic structural and functional units, to be structural, you have to be in a MAGRAV state. And to be MAGRAV, you have to have a magnetical gravitational balance. And to be functional, there has to be an energy exchanged. So to balance this MAGRAV, we have to have a containment. So when we look at the cell structure, that containment is a membrane. And then inside this membrane, we have this cytoplasm, and the cytoplasm facilitates energy exchange. And inside the cytoplasm, well, there are other organelles, and each with a specific function. So altogether, the cell itself is capable of replication, protein synthesis, and motility. And so sometimes that motility is just, following this spiral growth pattern, like Archimedes' screw, or it's a growth factor where the tubular form, through its spiral growth and spiral tightening, forms a tubular form artifact. So when we look at a frozen Ganzball, we see this manifestation because we can clearly see that there's gravitational core, and there are these magnetical hair-like lines that emanate from the center of the core and emanate out. Well, the thing about these lines is that under close observation, you find that these lines are actually hollow. And since you're looking at the difference in size between what could be a micro ends up being a nano, because it has to be smaller. And you can see that each hair-like line is significantly smaller, and not by one order of magnitude, but many orders of magnitude. So how does this relate to microbes? Well, as we said, microbes are in the microscopic organisms in the 10 to the minus sixth. And so these microscopic organisms are part of the education of the medical system. And so this becomes the legacy of Guy de Montpellier, going back to the late 1100s, where the medical community was actually built on the Crusades war. And then we move fast forward to the Battle of 1851, where you have microzymas. This is a legacy of Antoine Béchamp. And then, of course, you have the conflict of the filterable versus the non-filterable forms. And so the filterable forms become the legacy of Louis Pasteur. And this is carried on to this day. Because what we're talking about is germ theory. And so Louis Pasteur's germ theory saw disease as being caused by external factors. And Antoine Béchamp's considered the internal environment. And so we see these microorganisms and with their different life cycles, but they are all different stages of development that range between viruses, bacteria, yeast, and fungi, depending on the type of microorganism and depending on the environment. So there was a general acceptance of the germ theory, but was not accepted as having the primary responsibility for disease. And as Rudolf Virchow commented, mosquitoes seek the stagnant water, but they don't cause the pool to become stagnant. So when we look at bacteria, the fundamental thing is that it requires a host. And that bacteria decides if it's aerobic, which is oxygen abundant environment. And in that context, it supports the host, or it's an anaerobic, oxygen depleted environment. And that same bacteria goes through a metamorphosis and then eats the host, which is kind of handy because a host who is in an oxygen depleted environment is dying or dead. And so this becomes part of the potentiation of bacteria, isn't it? Where we have either in an oxygen alkaline environment supporting the host, or we have it in an acidic hydrogen deplete dominant environment where it eats the host. But there are all sorts of ranges in between. And so the point of the matter is that this plasma manifestation that we keep talking about precedes the physical manifestation. And we have to understand this because the physical manifestation may manifest differently in different people, but the plasmatic manifestation is the same. And how do we know this is true? Well, because we've all physically manifested on this planet, and yet we're all different. So a physical manifestation of a disruption, it may be, say, for instance, obesity or blood cancer, blood pressure or cancer. And the point of it is that the tendency towards a higher acidity, obviously it causes an anaerobic condition, but it also causes the DNA to expand. And in that process, reduces adenosine triphosphate production, which of course produces the energy that we need. And of course, the disruption to the cellular communication then becomes the manifestation. And as we say, it manifests differently in different people, which is to say, someone might have a problem with a lung and someone might have a problem with a kidney, but the problem would be the same. So last week when we talked about parasites, we were talking about these sectorians with these nanotubes. And their claim to fame is, of course, that they were cytoplasm suckers. So that means that these nanotubes could actually penetrate the membrane and get into the cytoplasm within another and then suck it out. So these nanotubes that were extending beyond the perimeter of the sectorian, they were not hurled. So it's not a spear chucker. They were not impaled like a sword. It didn't pursue like a predator. They, in fact, weren't even injected. There are no hooks They're not traps. They're just a fisherman without a hook. And what we don't see is the bait. Where's the bait? What was missing? So when we look at a microorganism like a macrophage, it seems to have some kind of bait because it attracts another foreign cell. And so in the left-hand picture, we can clearly see that the macrophage is quite large and the foreign cell is quite small. And then it's attracted to the macrophage somehow. And then it's engulfed by the macrophage. And as you can see in the third picture, well, that foreign cell is gone. It is entirely engulfed by the macrophage. So that's one way of getting rid of cells. So the two things we can conclude is that since these are single cell microbes, not all cells are the same size. But the macrophage wasn't pursuing. What is a pursuit? It's the act of following or hunting, reaching, or seeking, stalking, tracking, or trailing. So that could be the pursuit of prey. That could be the pursuit of money. That could be the pursuit of power. Could also be the pursuit of knowledge. Or as part of the American psyche, the pursuit of happiness. Isn't that what we all want? Happiness. And so I wonder if this white blood cell that is chasing this bacteria, and I mean, it's really chasing, and you have to say, well, how is this big fat white blood cell chase this tiny bacteria? And maybe someone should tell this bacteria that is being chased. Well, it knows it's being chased, and so it tries to run away. But the basic strategy, of course, is this tiny bacteria can slip through the gaps between other organisms, but the white blood cell seems to push these organisms aside like a bully and goes through that gap, widens the gap, and then eventually catches the bacteria and engulfs it. So what would seem like the chaser in this case has no capability of catching the smaller, but obviously that's not the case. And the other observation is that the bystanders are not concerned with this activity. Somehow they know that they are not going to be pursued. And somehow they know that they don't need to be involved. And what do they do as a result of this? Well, they get pushed around, don't they? And so as they get pushed around, there clearly is a gap between the bully and them. And in every instance that you look at, you can see that there is a field around each form. And that field, of course, is a maggraph. And so the external perimeter of that magravs is magnetical. But when you look at the chaser, it's also a shapeshifter to accommodate this pattern. But it maintains its magrav condition. It maintains the magnetical layer. And that magnetical layer, as we know that like particles repel, so the magnetical layer of the chaser is repelling the magnetical layer of the bystander. So, in essence, the magnetical layer of the bacteria should also be repelled, but somehow that is overcome. And the reason that is overcome is because the chaser has decided that this is the goal. This is the, shall we say, the pursuit of happiness. So there is a connection, and it doesn't seem to be obvious, but the connection is fulfilled with the catch. Who makes these choices? What is the basis for making these choices? And so we find that this is mitigating the condition, isn't it? Because there is a bacteria among us. And so can we say that the white blood cell has a warrior mentality? Well, does it operate in a gang? Or is it like a lone wolf? The lone gunman? And we know that the creation of a gang, a herd, or a lone wolf is a strategy of endurance. But in terms of the pursuer, in that example, when the job done, the microorganism is gone. In the form of bacteria, what we find that one bacteria as a precursor of another also facilitates mitigation. And so when we talk about this mitigation of condition, we can see that the microbes have a purpose. They are not warriors run wild. They are mitigating the condition of the environment, because clearly the elimination of that bacteria, if it is detrimental to the environment, then becomes an enhancement of the environment. We have a preoccupation with eliminating microbes. We see all microbes as bad. And the problem is when we do this, then there are no mitigating forces. And so that becomes an unmitigated disaster without microbes. What is an unmitigated disaster? It's a failure to maintain the balance. So when we look at the sectorian and the fact that it has, if you look at it differently, a star formation, and you say, well, is it a warrior or is it just a glutton? It's a gluttonous parasite, or is it a predator, or is it an invader? No, it's just a cytoplasm sucker. Well, then a couple of things we have to ask ourselves. Is it going to suck everything or just the cytoplasm? What's going to happen to the membrane? So maybe there are macrophages that will take care of the membrane after the sectorian finishes the job. But the question becomes is, have all these microorganisms surrounded the sectorian and ganged up? And so this is a gang attacking a lone wolf, or is the lone wolf attacking the gang? Well, the thing is that these other microorganisms seem to have fallen on the nanotubes. So there was an attraction force. And so if we say that the nanotubes are magnetical, and if we say that the magnetical sphere around the Magrav condition, which is the microorganism, is also negative, how is it possible to exchange that energy? And so if we understand that by surface to volume ratios that the nanotube has a higher negative charge than the membrane of the microorganism, then we find that the attraction increases, even though there's a repulsion. And since it's much more than an order of magnitude, maybe the repulsion is non-existent. But once that membrane is broken by the nanotube, the magnetical field force diminishes rapidly. And if that is the case, then the gravitational structure of the microorganism collapses. And so at that point in time, the magnetical attraction of the nanotube increases and brings the microbe closer. But what we don't see in this picture, and what we must assume, that if the desire is to suck the cytoplasm from the microorganism, because that is the goal, that is what initiated the interaction, that the membrane would no longer be desirable. And so that becomes left for some other macrophage to take care of. So that becomes the food for another. And overall, this will change the environment, won't it? Because you have the one which will suck the life out of these four other microorganisms. That will certainly change the pH of the environment. But it would also lead one to possibly conclude that if you look at the mass of all five of these microbes together, and if the guts, if you will, of the four microbes is sucked into the sectorian in the center, that buddy there is going to get fat. And if he doesn't expand, he's going to explode. But it doesn't seem to change the size of the field. So what does change? It must be the strength of the field. Because something has to change. So on which dimension will it change? So if it won't change on the diameter, and it won't change on the polarity, will it change on the field strength? And if it changes on the field strength, will that manifest itself into the physicality of what we see here on a microscopic level? Or will that be translated into changing of the environment? And if that is given towards the changing of the environment, then we will no longer suggest that this is a predator or a parasite or an invader. This will be a service provider. And what service will it be providing? Well, let's look at some of the services that man will provide, such as homogenization. So it's a process to make two mixtures of mutually non-soluble liquids the same throughout. Involves the emulsification of fat. So say oil and water don't mix, but if we emulsify the fat, then we can get this consistency. So it's a process like in terms of milk, where the fat droplets from milk are emulsified, and this prevents the cream from separating. In terms of our society, there's such a thing as making things uniform or similar, and it's called a cultural homogenization. And for some businesses, there's a fear. There's a fear of this cultural homogenization. And I have to wonder if one nation, one planet is a cultural homogenization, because if you go to another planet, you're certainly not going to say that, well, I'm from Chicago. Oh, really? And what solar system is that in? And then, of course, the discussion about Monsieur Pasteur, invited pasteurization. Now, this is an antibacterial process by which milk is heated to a specific temperature to kill harmful bacteria. Harmful bacteria, right? Which can lead to various diseases. And then, of course, there's this other reference to human fertility, which we call sterilization. But sterilization, as far as microorganisms is concerned, is a process that removes, kills, or deactivates all forms of life, particularly microorganisms. This becomes very important in our society, isn't it? Because we have to be clean, and cleanliness is next to godliness. And so this becomes not just a point of conflict, but a point of conflict resolution, isn't it? This is the way to clean things, drain the swamp, sort of. And so that effort becomes a point of containment. And it fulfills this energy binding requirement that we have for our self-serving needs. And so things that we don't like, well, we have to get rid of. And so if we don't like our neighbor, well, then we like to get rid of them. However, if we have a deficiency and our neighbor has more, then maybe we should just rob them. So this pattern of energy binding in a self-serving manner at the expense of others is what's been driving this planet. And so it creates this pH of war, shall we say, where we find that many warriors want to go to war and discover too late that they have expired. And so we look at the microbes, and is that what they're doing? Are they warriors, or are they service providers? And so when we look at the disparity between warmongers and peacemongers, we find the plasma rule where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength seems to create a conflict point. But in reality, this becomes the binding zone. And so that binding zone, because I think we're agreeing that bacteria are not warriors, but they go through this sequencing. And this sequencing is determined by the field strength of this binding zone. And this binding zone and its field strength is determined by the difference between the magnetical field forces of the two opposing forces. And so the attraction for the bacteria is in this binding zone, and the field force of this binding zone is changed through the activity. And we see that one bacteria is a precursor for another bacteria. In other words, the one bacteria will consume the other bacteria. But is it doing this as a eating, or is it doing this as an energy transfer? Because we find that as these sequences continue, and in nature, if we just leave it to ordinary nature, we find that in 6 weeks, bacteria that we're so preoccupied with sterilizing or pasteurizing becomes beneficial bacteria. This beneficial bacteria converts a stagnant swamp to a clean pond. And as we said, the mosquitoes like to lay their eggs in a stagnant swamp. So when we look at this bacteria, we find that we can change this rate of 6 weeks to create beneficial bacteria, and we can shorten that time through bacterial supplementation. So by harvesting a certain kind of bacteria, we can change this. And of course, to harvest it has to be filterable. But if we do a plasmatic supplementation, well, that's not filterable. And so what does it mean to do a plasmatic supplementation? Well, in order to process the cycle of growth in the clean pond, we have to create an environment. Do each of us have the skill set to do this? Do each of us have the physical capability to do this? Do each of us have the time to do this? What is the rate? What is the coverage? What is the field strength, and how much do you take into account? And so we find that the plasmatic supplementation, because it's at least an order of magnitude, is 10 times more. But there are many levels of plasmatic supplementation. Just in the nanolayers alone, we have thousands of layers, which implies significant orders of magnitude increases in terms of plasmatic supplementation. And so this supplementation affects the feeding and the feedback, doesn't it? If we do the proper feeding, then the feedback would be success. So the feeding is magnetical, and it creates a repulsion field. The feedback is gravitational. It creates an attraction field. And this is how we, as the last man standing, we have choices now where we can turn on and turn off the feeding, and we can increase and decrease the strength and enhance and diminish the positioning, because the stronger feeds the weaker. So it's not an adversarial point of view. It's a potentiation of strength point of view. So we see the initial potential energy as being stronger, and the final potential energy, well, of course, it's consumed and expired, so that becomes the weaker. And so as we find that all the microbes are not the same size, and each microbe is a magrav, so the atomic structure is the same. And so the name of an atom is very appropriate. It's uncut. So regardless of how small you are, what you eat is smaller. But, if it's too large, then you cut it up. But interestingly enough, when cells divide, you don't bleed. In other words, the organelles grow into organs, and the body grows from childhood to adulthood. And the skin doesn't just stretch, but it grows and envelopes the whole body. And so it becomes a representation of a magrav, where the skin is magnetical and the gans inside the skin is gravitational. And there are various layers. And so we see our physical dimension as being physical and uncut physicality. But what we don't see is the y-axis transition. And what causes the splitting? And what happens as a result of that? And how do we maintain this stability? And so we find that regardless of the position, the relationships creating of a magrav are a balance between the magnetical gravitational field forces, but they're changing. And so the scientific community says, well, that changing has to do with the balance between the magnetic fields and the conservation of energy. And then, of course, spiritually speaking, that's a balance between the spirit and the soul. Well, plasmatically speaking, that's a balance of the scientific relationships. And furthermore, we have to add to the knowledge to complete the three dimensions. So when we look at the conservation of energy, and as we said, well, one on one side is still there, and it has to still be there, because when you look at the initial kinetic energy, it is bounced off by the initial potential energy. And that's on one side of the equation. On the other side of the equation, you have another one and another one. Except this is two. And this would be the final kinetic energy balanced off with the final potential energy. And so that's the law of conservation of energy. And so if we interpret this and understand that the kinetic energy is magnetical and the potential energy is gravitational, we find that the balance has to be a relationship between the magnetical gravitational field forces on one side of the equation and the magnetical and gravitational field forces on the other side of the equation. And when you have a balance of one to the other, and that creates a mag-grav condition. And so the question then becomes, is which side of the equation is magnetical and which side is gravitational? Because each side has a certain amount of representation of the magnetical and the gravitational field forces. So to balance off the magnetical gravitational on one side, there has to be an opposite gravitational magnetical balance on the other side. And then you create this mag-grav condition. And so this becomes very important because it's fundamental to the force fields of attraction. Opposites attract. So when we're talking about the splitting of the hydrogen from the hydroxyl, that each side is seeking balance. We said one side is positive and the other side is negative. So they're out of balance. And so this balance seeking is done instantaneously. And since we are all knowledge seekers, isn't that what we're seeking? We're seeking a balance in our life. And why is that? Why are we so fervently seeking? Because we're out of balance. We're all binding at the expense of others because the foundation of our knowledge is based on lies. And so in order for us to balance the lies, we have to balance it with the truth. And you know that it's real because it's balanced. So the balance creates a form. And the balance seekers are form constructors. So we find that the balancing of the condition creates a form. So the acidic condition is in fact alkaline forming. And the alkaline condition is acid forming. And so if we focus on the condition and we say, well, that condition is acidic or that condition is alkaline, but we have to change that and understand that that condition is one half of the equation. So to balance that equation, we have to balance it off with the opposite. That's what completes the attraction field forces. So if we're looking at the potentiation of balance, hey, wait a second. That means that if you're in an acidic condition, you're alkaline forming, and if you're in an alkaline condition, you're acid forming, and then all the pHs in between indicate a susceptibility of going to one or the other. And so that depends on the environment, doesn't it? So there has to be a communication. So it isn't just the two forces, there's a z-axis polarity that's involved as well. So we have the horizontal field and the vertical field, and they create this spherical field. And something is always something as opposed to being something else. And there's no such thing as a garbage field. There's no place to check in your garbage, and there's no a way to throw it. So when we look at the pH of locust swarms, and they're saying, well, this is a party. And the farmer says, oh, no, this is a disaster. And so once that is complete, then the question is the next party a disaster waiting to happen? And how do we choose that party? Well, it all depends on the balance of its force fields, doesn't it? So we find that life on this planet has a gravitational confirmation of the need for oxygen. So not only is it part of the water, but it's part of the air that we breathe. And it has a specific color spectrum, which is the fingerprint of its signature. And it too has a gravitational confirmation of the interaction of the magnetical interaction of the fields from the sun and from the earth. And what does it bring? And why does it bring it here? And that would be because of the energy coming from the universe, which also is supplying a magnetical field force. And the combination of three magnetical field forces give us this gravitational confirmation of this oxygen spectrum. So these become part of life's lessons. So we see that the amino acid in a plasmatic condition is the connection to the soul of the creator, isn't it? And so life becomes the preservation of magnetical fields. And interestingly enough, Louis Pasteur apologized to humanity on his deathbed, but he absolutely refused to apologize to Béchamp. And since then, humanity has ignored Pasteur's apology and therefore has ignored Béchamp's microzymas. And so we have always been dependent on this feedback summary where we just see the light, hear the sound, feel the heat, the pressure. We are attracted to the luster, the superficiality, and the individual laminar containment. And so all of this becomes part of the x-axis and the y-axis transition dimensions. And man is dominant in his range deviation in the physicality. And we find that there are no microbes in outer space. I wonder why that is. Do you think the microbes are quarantined? They're restricted to our environment here? Because of the service that they're providing? Because humanity is quarantined in the Earth-space spherical Z-axis transition form artifact, often referred to as life. Because without these microbes, certain functions in our body would not be possible, and we'll discuss that next week. Because we are feedback dominant, and that feedback domination comes from the matter state. But the matter state has an interaction of the physical state and the plasmatic state. But it's still the matter state. And we know this because we have all these elements, and each one is more dense than the other. And they make up all the details of our Earth space. And since our Earth space is our home, then there has to be an attraction, and which means the details of our Earth space are likewise our details. And our existence on this planet has to be in balance. Otherwise, we won't be on this Earth space. And yet, in our pursuit of happiness, we want to exchange that for gold. And we know that not all gold diggers are men. And yet here we are in the plasma science able, in the post-Sanya conference era of 2024, able to generate gold GANs. And if you're able to generate gold GANs and sell it at the price of gold, then all financial considerations are taken care of. But then you're not mining for the gold. You're deceiving in an energy binding format at the expense of others. This is the part that the gold diggers are missing. So when we look at the transmission spectrum, we find that there's a non-visible microbial spectrum. And this facilitates the transition of the visible transmission spectrums. So we can see that there's a spectrum to spectrum susceptibility, but there's also a surface superficiality and an internal substance. The internal substance is based on the plasma substrate, and the superficiality is represented in terms of our physicality. So wherever we're discussing is a point of containment. And so our immediate reference is the visible color spectrum. But every containment is a balance between the gravitational and magnetical force fields. And so that susceptibility determines its positioning, but not only in relation to itself, not only in relation to its environment, but in relation to one step beyond the gravitational, beyond the magnetical, because it involves the Maggrav condition of another field. So we find that this Z-axis transition dimension is dependent on the communication. And our communication antenna has to stay within the range transition. So we understand that the release of binding energy precedes the retrieval of beneficial energy. The field release precedes the field capture, and the giving precedes the taking. The emission precedes the absorption. So motion itself cannot exist without coexistence, because motion is a product of existence. Motion and coexistence reside in both matter states. And so we are deciding in the lowest physical dominant state to tune in. And we need to understand that the plasma dominant tuning precedes that. So when we talk about the range transition by nearness and proximity, we're talking about the interaction of the X and Y axis, not distance. This facilitates the Z-axis transition dimension, which is non-man space centric, nor is it Earth space centric. And it's not even the sun space centric. It is a field of containment. It is dimension centric. It is proximity centric, and it is pressure centric. These three are part of the transmission dimensions, and they're not the message. This is how the message is contained. And so the question then becomes is which transition dimension is the folding deviation and what causes it? And so when we look at quarks and I Ching and DNA and historical and transgenerational effects, these are all blueprints for energy transfer to matter state. And they're undifferentiated because there are no rules in extrapolation from the past to the future. We're talking about the presence. And the present is in an uncut, differentiated state. And so the microbes facilitate field balancing in this present state. This is the blueprint state. It's part of the uncut physicality, the atom, the monatomic nanostructure, GANS, plasma state, field state, and universal state. And I say, well, how do these microbes facilitate everything if they are quarantined from the universal community? Because in order for us to entertain the universal community, we have to be in a balanced state. We cannot be warmongers. We have to take into account the new atomic math, where the neutron mass equals not only the proton and electron mass, but the mass of the p-entics coming from the universe, plus the total mass of the matter, antimatter, and dark matter. And that facilitates our balance and positioning. The totality is achieved through this energy level balancing, and the microbes are facilitating that. And if we don't get our act straight, we will never be able to leave this earth space the way it is intended. So when we're targeting outer space, we have to understand that we have to be in balance with the reality dimension, the peacefulness of the universe that would allow us to travel from one gravitational space to some other gravitational space. And we have these choices. And the reason we have these choices is because there are facilitators that facilitate this plasma shift. And we are part of that. And we know that we're part of that because we were born, and we weren't born without purpose. So do you have to know the details of all of these individual energy states? Or do we have to understand that there's an interactive energy transfer state and it facilitates our motion from the physical to the matter state, the dark matter, and the plasma matter? So the purpose of our communication is to do the message feeding and the feedback message. And we need that antenna to be up so that we can manifest this transition, this transmission tuning transition, where the selection of one force is magnetical and balanced by the force selection of another gravitational force. So the resulting selections feed the magrav manifestation. So the selection manifestation is predetermined by choosing the peace dome of intention. And the range transition affects the standard folding deviation, leaves no room for war. So our z-axis transition is balanced to and from the peace dome. And we didn't say which environment. It's a plasma balance where the knowledge and wisdom can give you a deeper insight. So of course the experience will change a man's perspective, but it allows us to reflect on life. So we see that misconduct becomes harder to rationalize And the historical reference becomes meaningless because the pH balance is seeking, and seeking becomes a polar balance. And the polar balance becomes a plasma balance, which is uncut. And so when we look at the pH of the MAGRAV, we see that there are many points on the perspective scale of this MAGRAV, and that gives us the uniqueness of life. So it is not just a linear North Pole, but there are two poles. It's a two-way street. And on each street, there are many points on the polar scale. And as we see with the linear pH of motors and how they can be unfolded, we find that our blue planet is turning red because of all the bloodletting, and it's affecting the pH of this planet. And regardless of whatever we do, when the soldiers leave, the flowers will grow. And the reason that will happen is not only because of the microbes that are balancing the field forces on this planet, but it's because of the indomitable spirit of the universal forces. Which are represented on the pH of peace. This is how we can transition the various potentiation layers. And so we are past the first transmutation test, and we have 3 more to go every third Friday of the month. And it changes things. Oh, yes, it changes things. And how do we know that? Because there's some people who are involved with suppressing the technology, and then there's others who are interested in researching the technologies. And the difference is the self-serving needs of the binding energy. And the binding energy could be a small scheme or a large scheme, and we can make choices because we're in the post-March 15th era of 2024, where we can make a new selection process between the bountiful space of our Earth space and the transmutation space of outer space, granting us the peacefulness and the graceful space of our inner space, that greater oneness that transcends the limitations of nuclear science and takes off the limitations that we have with the plasma science. We've been sharing that with all the knowledge seekers around the world in our workshops, of which we've just completed 548 Thursdays in a row. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. So welcome all the beautiful knowledge seekers who are learning about this new selection process of the new plasma science. But it requires a world peace treaty, and there are many ways to sign it. But you have to sign it with sincerity. What causes the transition of the Z-axis dimension? Is man the reactor of a three-dimensional universe? And we're looking for heaven. Can we find it through the field transition? Can we go into outer space without a peace dome? Well, we find that microbes cannot transition dimensions of history. They work here in the presence to facilitate a balancing. The time has come to clean our dirty, physical, spherical transmission dimensions. Plasma science needs to be delivered daily via the peace dome in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. And that's the end of this class. I hope you all enjoyed the trip. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex, again for sharing so much knowledge. I'm glad we don't have to know every detail about this, but again, the intentions and emotions can control the craft or control a lot of things within our own reactors. I think you're heading towards Nobel Prize status. Are you ready to award yourself?
Sure, why not?
Right, it's for every man for himself. And again, gaining these understandings in a deeper and deeper way, I think, again, we'll all be Nobel Prize laureates in so many ways. Before Saeed leaves, I know he had put a question in the Q&A. Hello, Mark. Will there be borders in plasmatic age? Alex, do you want to address that? I think they're up and coming. There's going to be more borders as the states within the United States become nations, and China is in a way broken up, and some other, perhaps Brazil. So we may have more borders than less, at least in the transition time, which he said could be anywhere from 10 to 15 years. But please, someone else address it. Yes.
Well, this is an important point because it can be a form of shock therapy for a lot of people because everyone reacts differently. When I found out, I was seriously angry, and you can understand the anger because it isn't the lack of knowledge. It isn't the wrong knowledge. It's the deception. It's the willful and skillful deception. So that deception has been well-founded in trust. And when that trust becomes violated, that trust is worth more than money. And so if you were to lose some money, that would hurt. But if you lose trust, now you've lost something that is hurtful, and it really, shakes you to your core. And you say, well, is all of humanity like this? And you lose your faith in humanity. And when you lose your faith in humanity, then you lose in the decision that you made to be born. You were born with trust. You were born willingly and happily and with a purpose. So to entrench this trust in a very stable gravitational manner, then we have to harmonize our environment to make it conducive to allow that to happen. So we become the microbes on this planet to facilitate the balancing of this planet. And where the balancing comes in, we don't have to tell the microbes what to do. They know how to take care of business. We're the ones who have the problem. Why? Because we're the ones who created the problem. And why? Well, because of our lack of understanding. And so it isn't enough just to say, well, this is the answer. You have to experience it, you have to absorb it, you have to become part of it. And that takes time because different people progress at a different rate. And so there has to be an allowance, a gracefulness to not say, well, you know what, we're just going to pull the rug out from under you and you can crash and burn wherever, you fall. That is not the way the plasma science should be delivered because the means justifies the end. And harsh means gives a harsh end. A graceful means gives a graceful end. And that's what the Keshe Foundation is all about. Back to you.
Right, and that nobody gets abused due to a lack of knowledge, as Mr. Keshe had said, but it's going to take, I think he used 5 longs, it's going to take a long, 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 long time for this process in a way. Hopefully we can shorten it, but I think it's a step-by-step procedure, we'll see. But yes, so no one gets abused due to a lack of knowledge, and this is what happens to all of us. So this is part of the Keshe Foundation elevation of humanity. And that applies across the board, the wellness and the religions and travel and understanding our structure.
And if I may add,
Please.
those who are abused now have, shall we say, a different strategy available. And those who do the abuse have an awareness of the consequences of that. Because one of the benefits of living in the physical reality is the delay in consequences. So the transmutation to the soul state, if you will, eliminates those delay in consequences because it's in a zero time transition. So the souls know what's coming. And so there will be a phenomenal resistance for those who are dysfunctional to remain dysfunctional. But those who are seeking an alternative, they will have a gravitational transition come at a much faster rate because it'll be welcome. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, great. Let's see if anyone in the participants would like to say anything or make a comment or ask a question or bring a story and share with us.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Alex.
Hello,
Selena.
Selena.
Did anyone contact with Mochtech within 2 weeks?
Yes, I heard yesterday that someone had made contact, so apparently the system has been restored there in Bengali.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
So,
quite a while. I was missing him. He hadn't come into the One Planet, One Nation for a while. I think since the 17th, maybe.
yeah, there is having a protest and a lot of stuff happening there. I didn't contact my family like 2 weeks, and then yesterday I contact, and maybe I'm gonna call tonight again to Mashpak in Bangladesh. Maybe.
Tell him we said hello from the American Knowledge Team, please.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, there is a lot of stuff happening. So, you know the stuff happening over there, right?
I'm not familiar. All I knew there was an outage, and I talked to someone there
No.
who, no?
There, the student, they're having a protest like
Oh, I see.
for the quota. Do you know quota? The governmental job, they keep some job separate for the people. So those kinds of stuff there, over there is no job, you know. The lot of children, they get educated, and then after the education they don't get job. The government almost 3-4 items, they keep the 56% job for those, they reserve those job for the others, and then the children doesn't get any job. So they're protesting for that. It's for, I think so, the 1971 when Bangladesh get freedom from Pakistan. That were those for those people who freedom fighter, and then their third generation right now is having 33% jobs. So the student one, they're saying it is almost 3 generation. So we don't have to keep that much at that much percent, 30% or 33%. It's too much. Maybe 10% is 5 to 10% is okay, but government doesn't want to hear. So they open fire to the student, the police and army, everything is there. And a lot of people die there. A lot of people, not people, the students, young children and brilliant children who are in the Dhaka University. The university is very exceptional. The good children, the best children goes there. So they protesting first, and then whole country is right now protesting. Government doing a lot of stuff. The curfew there, no internet, no phone call, nothing was there. So everybody was worried. Now little bit we can connect. Yesterday I saw little bit connection. So, but not fully. Internet is open, not like before. So we are worried about everything. We don't know the end situation, but we hope the best.
So that's what everything happened because of a protest over employment,
Yeah,
getting a job
yeah,
after graduation.
yeah. And then government did that. They're corrupt. They keep the job. The government keep the job for their people. Their people, and the government is very corrupt. This time when she came, she was very. She's too much. She is very corrupt right now. So
Okay, you're saying the leader is a woman?
now, yeah, she's
Okay.
a woman.
Okay. Yeah,
She's
I
in.
don't know the details about that whole situation other than the internet was lost and there was
Yeah,
corruption. That's the only thing I was told
a lot
by
of people
someone
die
who,
there.
yeah.
Yeah. So you're worried about that. Everybody is worried. So let's see. What is the end? Who knows?
Well, we elevate the soul of the nation. Again, this is the abilities we have within all of us to see souls in need or nations in need and work on that manner of sending energies. We can't fly there. We couldn't even get into the country. We'd never get a visa, but we can touch through this mother connection of the creator within all of us and within that country as well. So this is the work we can do quietly in the background. We don't have to broadcast it, and we can touch and reach them for the change.
Yeah. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to bring something up?
Me again.
Who's this? The Nobel Prize winner?
Oh, please.
I was going to ask you, Alex, I sort of missed, did you say Pasteur apologized to humanity on his deathbed, but he wouldn't apologize to another scientist?
Yes.
What was the reason for the apology again? Again, a world-renowned, probably a Nobel Prize winner, Pasteur.
Yes, he believed that illness comes from without,
Oh, okay.
and
So
based on
this was the apology.
yes. When there was an experiment done with cancerous tissue, and so and let's say that it was skin cancer, and you know how you can graft a leaf of one plant and graft it onto another plant and get it to anchor and grow at that point. And so they were trying to do that with cancer. And so they took a cancerous tumor and decided to graft it onto a person who already had cancer. And in a second experiment, grafted onto the skin of a person who
Ah,
didn't have cancer.
okay.
And they wanted to compare the results there. And what they determined was that the person who had cancer, let's say, lung cancer or something else, developed skin cancer. And the person who was healthy, the cancerous tumor didn't take hold. And the outcome of that particular experiment proved that cancer is not a communicable disease. So when they're looking for a cause of cancer, it isn't something that is, shall we say, socially transmitted in the physical form. But what we found in the plasma science is that it is in a psychosomatic form. And so is the psychosomatic condition a physical condition? Psychosomatic condition is an emotional condition, and the emotional condition affects the physical condition. And I wanted to reference again Claudia's comment with respect to the physicality, and to understand that the clinging to the emotional condition and having emotion of that is part of the attachment that we have. And in order to alleviate the stresses, we have to detach ourselves. Now, the detachment from the physical emotion does not mean that the physical emotion is bad. The bad emotion stemming from the physicality creates a condition that facilitates a psychosomatic condition of poor health. And that actually facilitates stress. But stress on its own does not create an unhealthy condition, because stress is annealing. It's a hardening, a stabilizing. It is a teaching tool to show you how things work. So if you surround yourself with people who can't handle the stressful situation, and you can handle the stressful situation, you could easily be overwhelmed by all these other people. And therefore you become, shall we say, engulfed in this stressful situation. But in a stressful situation, you don't have time to panic. You have to deal with that stressful situation. And so someone who is experienced will hopefully know how to deal with it, or have the experience to rationalize how to deal with it. And to understand that the emotional experience in the physical state and the emotional experience in the plasmatic state are two different emotions. So is there a judgment to say, well, the plasmatic emotional state, is better than the physical emotional state? No, not really. What is the judgment is that the plasmatic emotional state is from a stronger field state, and the emotional field state in the physicality is in the weaker. But one of the joys of being in the physical state is the emotional, shall we say, satisfaction that we get from being in that state. So there's two ways to look, when it's raining. So someone may say, oh, what a lousy day, it's raining. And, a farmer who's dependent on the environment may say, oh, what a great day, it's raining and providing nourishment for my crop. So it's the same day, but one point of view says it's a bad day, the other says it's a good day. And so it's a change in a point of view. But what's really important is to understand that we are in heaven. There's not a place to go to say, we can't wait to go to heaven. That heaven is within our emotional state. And that emotional state is within us. That's part of our inner space. And so if that emotional state in our inner space is in harmony, then, at that point in time, we are in heaven. And it's not a matter of looking through rose-colored sunglasses. It is to understand that this earth space is heaven, because that is the intention of the Creator. And so things that we're doing that is not in harmony with the earth space is contributing to the malaise and the unhealthy environment that we have. And since we are part of the environment and you can't extricate yourself from the environment, there is no place to go. Okay, wherever you go, you are sharing that environment with others. So we find that our viciousness, our warmongering transcends even to the microbes. But we are aggressive in terms of wanting to steal our energy binding energy from others, whereas the microbes are busy stealing the energy binding needs to balance off. So it appears on the surface that it's the same characteristic, but it's a different point of view of the same action, just like the perception with respect to rain. So the physical emotion is not a bad thing to have. It's the attachment to that physical emotion and understand the relationship and the effect that it has. And since if you are in an environment where everybody is stealing from you, then you have to set up a barrier to prevent that. And you cannot leak and have an effective barrier. The leakage means that there's an opening in the barrier, and any leakage, it doesn't matter how good the barrier is still going to be a leakage. So, we see this with a hole in the hull of a boat. Doesn't matter how big the boat is, and doesn't matter how small the hole is. You know, if the boat is leaking, it's leaking, and that's the point. So if we want a solid barrier, we have to detach ourselves from the leaking activity. And this was a harsh lesson for me to learn, because I had a lot of faith in a lot of the things that constituted our social structure. And when I found out that that social structure was based on a bunch of lies, and that these lies were not just misinformation, but a willingness and skillfulness in terms of its deception, and I was the target. And I said, oh, you know, and the question comes in, who decides who's the target? Who decides who is the shooter? And when is the shooter shooting at the target finished being the shooter and becomes the target himself? And this is what the soldiers of fortune don't understand. Their motivation is based solely on money, not loyalty. The loyalty extends to the bank account and no further. So in that case, if we change the bank account, we can change the loyalty. And so this becomes a mode of operation. And it's obvious. So you can't hang your hat on that. That is not gravitationally stable. So why are you even entertaining that? Oh, because there's a chance. There's a chance we could be wealthy. The pursuit of money. Well, in the pursuit of money, we forget the most important thing, and that's the pursuit of truth. Because with the pursuit of truth, you achieve happiness. And that's the American way of life. That is the foundation of the Constitution of the United States. And this is one of the reasons that the United States is so attractive. But it has been, how shall we say, it has changed its attitude, and this is unfortunate. So it needs a correction, because it's limiting our growth, it's limiting our expansion. The life, liberty, and happiness is curtailed, and that is limiting our plasmatic experience, because our plasmatic experience extends beyond the physicality of this planet. And so it would really be wrong to say that, you know, the emotions attached to our physicality are bad. It's the interpretation for some and the effect that it has on others. And so we need to shield ourselves in that regard. And in order to shield ourselves, we have to stop leaking and detach ourselves from this physical emotion and understand that it's the plasmatic emotion which dictates. And that will guide us, because that guide is our soul, and that soul is within us. And that soul is our best friend, because that soul is us. And you wouldn't lie to yourself, because you know the truth. And if you don't believe that, well, then you're deceiving yourself. And that is very sad. So let's remember that, you know, we have heaven on earth, and we should view it that way and pray for the souls of others who are misguided. Back to you, Mark.
So be careful of the big microphage that's trying to engulf you, but we'll get back to that in a minute. If anyone has a picture of,
say microphage?
yes, or macrophage. If anyone has a picture of the original Oasis system, maybe we can share that, because I'm going to close out with remember the Oasis system, and this is what Mr. Kesh is creating on this YouTube channel and what will be shown. But these are just the beginning steps. So if you have a picture, hold it and maybe we can discuss it. Anyone else have a thought or a comment or a question? And they can be rather simple, like my questions are. It doesn't have to be anything extraordinary.
Mark,
Yes.
can I repeat one of my old experience again?
Sure, if you think it's appropriate, fine.
Okay. So I don't know how long ago I told, I think so, few times in Bangalore teaching and your teaching, and so it was like that. I was I don't know. It felt like I was dreaming whole night. And at the morning when I woke up, it happened sometimes, right? A lot of time, it feel like oh, I dreamed whole night, but I didn't sleep. But I went somewhere. I don't remember where. So those kinds of feelings. So when I woke up at the morning, and I sat in the bed, and then when I opened my eyes, I saw my feet. I was so happy. It was so
When you
peaceful.
opened your eyes, Selena, you said you saw your feet and you were
Yeah.
so happy. Okay.
Yeah, it felt like the most beautiful feet I have, and then it felt like I never had my feet a long time, like thousand years. This is the first time I'm seeing my feet, and it is beautiful more than anything. It is so beautiful, and I was feeling so peaceful. I can explain. You know, I had a lot of stuff in my life, right? I am not a young child. I'm middle-aged woman, right? So in this my life, I had a lot of experience. I get a lot of stuff. I never felt like that. Those kinds of peacefulness, and it is beautiful. And then I was paralyzed seeing my beauty. Like though I can move. I was sitting there, but I'm not moving. I can't moving. I couldn't moving. So I was looking here and there, like a long time. I was sitting in the bed, and then after that, I woke up, um, went to the bathroom and doing stuff, everything. 2 hours. That feelings with me. It is more than it is. There is no um, there is no sentence I can explain. It was so beautiful. It was so peaceful. I can say, like in that time, if the big car or anything hit me, or I didn't feel anything, like if I don't have any food, I don't have any clothes, and if I have nothing, still I am happy. I am peaceful. I am like a heaven. I'm in heaven. I felt like that. And I felt whole night I was somewhere else, those kinds of places, and came to the morning in my bed. So, and I'm beautiful. So if I count total thing, maybe I was in heaven, and I brought the emotion in my earthly life in here, and I felt that in my physical body and my soul in that time. So it was the thing. And I'm saying right now this thing because I felt the emotion. I know when we are in higher elevated situation, higher elevated mode, that time what is feel, how we feel. I felt that thing. And now with the question in our everyday physical life, we have to face a lot of stuff, right? There is a lot of things happening around us. And if I keep that feelings right now in my heart, and if I get something in my physical body right now, like my around is not suitable or happening something, should I keep my that feelings, the peaceful feelings in my heart, and keep paralyzed, or somebody really hit me or really doing something, so I'm not gonna protect myself? So that is the question. What should I do in that situation? I think, because my experience, I understood, yeah, I should keep my emotion, my feelings inside me peaceful. But in my physical body, if something happened, I have to protect my body. And I have to keep my environment safe. With two, we can make something. Keeping one thing and losing another thing, we're not gonna go that much far. We have to keep both in balance, both in safe and both in peaceful. So we have to work for both sides, not one side. It is my understanding, and that's why I tell. And I don't know how good I explain, but you understand what I'm trying to say. That's it.
Yes,
Thank
and
you.
we heard this from a number of people that went through the transmutation sessions, that they felt an amazing amount of peacefulness and balance. And I think you experienced the emotion of observing your own beauty and grace of your creation. And this is very, very nice story.
Thank you. But my final word is we should keep both safe, both sides safe and peaceful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Selena.
Anyone else want to bring a thought, an idea, a question, or an exception to what was discussed today? Feel free.
I just want to take a moment to thank everybody for allowing me to continue making these presentations. I hope you enjoy them, and I'm looking forward to next week. And thanks, Mark and everybody. And I'm going to withdraw in the background.
Well, just
Thank
a
you,
moment.
Alex.
Just a moment. What about this macrophage? And you said it had no bait. And I was thinking of the macrophage as sort of the structure that we, in a way, get co-opted into, or these fields surround us and we can't seem to get out of the structure field. But the bacteria, you said the macrophage doesn't have any bait. Is it using a magnetic field to attract the bacteria? Is this what's going on, or is this something plasmatic happening where it doesn't have any physical bait, but I'm thinking of the egg and the sperm. And even if you have 100 million sperm, if the last one coming, it could be the very, very last one, but it has the magnetical gravitational key to enter the egg, even though 100 million have gone before it and failed. Is this the same in a way with the bacteria? It's attracted by a certain magnetic gravitational field created by this larger structure and gets co-opted or surrounded by it? Alex?
Yes, so that would be very a very good description. And what really proves this is first of all that there is an attraction. So why would one bacteria be attracted? Well, it obviously doesn't know the result of that attraction, right?
Right. And that's what I was saying about getting co-opted in the structure. We don't always realize what we're getting into there by linking to those fields and not creating, in a way, a balance field.
But if you see that one is chasing another, then and you don't have the sense of fear, there must be some kind of communication to tell you, well, you're not the one being chased. And imagine halfway through the chase, the chaser says, oh, I can't catch this guy, I'm tired. Oh, you're convenient, I'll catch you instead. Well, there's a persistence in the chase. There's a specificity in the chase, and it's determined to catch, and it does without harming anything else. So is it actually a invader? Is it a attacker? Or is it a service provider? Because obviously it has satisfied its need to that it began the chase and then completed the chase, and no other bystanders were hurt in the process. There was no such thing as collateral damage. I don't want to go into that subject.
Right. It sounds like it's trying to create a balanced condition.
Yeah.
Within the structure that it's existing in. Anyone else have a question? I do have one more, Alex, if you'd like to. The speed of light, Einstein was saying we could never reach the speed of light, we could approach it. But anyway, now we're understanding from the Keshe Foundation that light is actually one of the slowest speeds in the entire universe, this collection of beamtics and what have you. Do you want to share anything about light as a photon or light as a particle? I think Mr. Keshe said we could look at it both ways. Alex, is that something you'd want to address? About seeing light as a photon or seeing light as a particle?
Well, yes, I was actually hoping to save that for another class, but you brought it up here, and it's an excellent point, something we need to understand.
We can review it the next time as well. Don't feel shy about that. As Rick said, let's go back to basics.
Okay, so the point with respect to the light is that in order to be visible, it has to be in the visible spectrum. And so when it's in the visible spectrum, then it is physical. That the colors are physical. But we have different colors. And so we interpret these colors as being different speeds. We've introduced refraction, for instance, the way light travels through air or the way light travels through water, and we see the difference, and we see the bending of the light, and we say, oh, well, in the more denser medium, the light is slower. But, in the reality, the light is following in the denser medium is following a longer path. So if it's a longer path, it's certainly going to be take longer if it's the same speed. So the only way it can take the same, it can have a longer path and remain constant. It has to have a faster speed. Well, that's not the case. The speed of light is a constant transmission. So the point of the matter is the density. So if the gravitation seeks density, and the color of the light is differentiated by the density. So when we look at the cover of book number 2, and you say, well, it's the structure of the light. So the structure of the light is the physical manifestation of those energy fields. And so we determine that, well, there's a wave-particle duality. So because of the interaction of the wavelength and the frequency, we say, okay, well, that's part of the wave part. But then there's a particle part. And yes, there is, because there is a way for us to go from one maggrav to another. And it isn't just in outer space. It is in all space, which is to say, in between space and microspace, you know, even the space in between the macrophage and the bacteria that it's chasing. So in order to do that, it has to be contained. It has to be self-contained. And the way it's self-contained is as a particle. And so when it's self-contained as a particle, it has to be in balance with itself. It has to be in a maggrav condition. It is from that maggrav condition that it does the giving and the taking. And the giving and the taking is negative or positive. So the light itself is obviously positive. So the giving and the taking indicates the direction of the motion. Which way is it giving? Which way is it taking? And if we understand that there has to be a balance, so then that light coming in has to be balanced with the light coming out. But the light in physicality is a manifestation of energy. So if the light is a physical manifestation, then there's a difference between the physical light and the plasma light. But this is where we also run into some problems, because we know that we can see an aura. And the aura and the light from the sun and the manifestation of color are different in different ways. So it isn't just the color. The color is not the factor. What is the factor is the manifestation of the energy in some kind of form. And so the light that we see is a form artifact of the energy in motion. And the light that we don't see is energy in motion. And the form artifact is the manifestation of the energy state.
Great.
Okay.
I look
What
forward
do you
to
think
your,
about that?
yeah, great. I look forward to your next teaching on light. in understanding more of it. But as we understand, this light is one of the slowest speeds in the universe, as opposed to what has been taught, that we could never approach it. It's actually one of the slower speeds.
Well, let's understand that the physicality is the lowest energy state. And so the factors that are manifest within the physicality, whether they are in a non-tangible or tangible format, are part of the slowest energy state. Let me just pull up this other thing, because if we just determine that light has to do with frequency and wavelength, well, if we look at, X-rays are not visible, gamma rays are not visible, neither are radio waves, but they are part of the physical state. Okay, so what we can say is that the visible color spectrum is part of the tangible state, because we could see that. These other waves, so they have the same characteristics as light, except that they're not visible. So we can't say that they are not light. They are light, because the constituents of light is a relationship of wavelength and frequency. So what we can say is that this point of containment within the electromagnetic spectrum is the lowest energy state. And within this lowest energy state, we can have different frequencies and different wavelengths. And so the balance between, and what I've been saying as part of the transition series, if we have an energy in the radio frequency, and so that has a relationship with the wavelength in the radio frequency, it would have to be balanced if it was in the electromagnetic spectrum by some other ray, and that could be an X-ray or it could be a gamma ray. And say, why is that true? And the reason it's true is because of the law of conservation of energy, to balance off the fields. So wherever you are on this electromagnetic spectrum, there's a position. And wherever you are in that position, you are in a Maggrav condition, which is a balance of the gravitational magnetical force fields. However, to maintain on the electromagnetic spectrum, there has to be a balance between the one position and another position on that electromagnetic spectrum. And so the question comes in is, what happens if you are transitioning to a different transmission spectrum? Will there still be the balance? And the answer is yes. Thanks, Mark.
Yes, gee, I wonder why my science teacher in school never put it this way. Okay, did anyone find the original Oasis picture? If not, well, I have it somewhere, but I just couldn't pull it up at this point in time. But we do want to thank everyone for being here and continue to move forward. I'm just going to share the screen for a moment. Okay, I think this is it. And again, thank you all for giving up a piece of your life in a way to be here, but hopefully we're learning more. And again, there's a reason for all of this. And hopefully you're proud of the work you do, and you're proud of the person you are, and you're proud of the difference you make. And of course, taking the three wise men along with you every day, every minute of every day, if you can, makes the journey a lot more peaceful, a lot easier, and creates a balance within your own structure that then you can hopefully transmit to the others, or create another beautiful atmosphere as you breathe 12 times a minute or 20 times a minute, and improve the atmosphere of this planet with your plasmatic CO2. So thank you all for sharing and being here and bringing the change.